He lived in London then, but in 1981 moved to New York, to Manhattan's unfashionable Lower East Side. Mr. Crisp describes himself as an effeminate homosexual, and now as then, he makes this quite obvious. 14 years on from that first interview, I caught up with him on a bleak, wet and blustery day which was playing havoc with any attempt at style. As we wove our way down 2nd Avenue to his favourite restaurant, which had opened specially for us, the wind tugged at his chiffon scarf and he had to hold on tightly to his velvet fedora. Now in 1989 you're in America. Has the approach to you changed greatly?
Oh, totally. For both reasons. One, because the time is different. We've moved into a more permissive age. See, when I was young, we didn't know that sex was here to stay. We thought if nobody mentioned it, it would go away. We were wrong. And if sex can be mentioned, then in the end, kinky sex can be mentioned. Now, everybody takes into account the idea that somebody might be homosexual, which they never did when I was young. Also, of course, I have now entered the category of being a funny old gentleman. Added to that, I am a mad foreigner. And of this I have proof. When I was walking along a dim side street, someone was actually coming toward me, already smiling. And when he reached me, he said, "You're an actor." And I said, "Not really, I do go on the stage." And he said, "British, say no more." And he walked on, howling with laughter.
You would have to keep your accent, wouldn't you? You daren't become Americanized, because the English accent is very appealing, it appears, because I've noticed them smile as I open my mouth before I've said anything funny.
Oh, this is true. Before I ever came here for the first time, I asked a gentleman called Arthur Cantor whether I should learn the language. And he said, on no account. The more English you sound, the more likely you are to be believed.
Why did you come to America?
To live, I came here because I was invited. I couldn't have come here before because I hadn't the money. I've never in England earned more than £12 a week in my entire life.
But you could have done. You're a writer.
I don't think that was much help. I have written all the books they told me to write. I've never refused to write anything. But no book I've ever written has exceeded the advance given me optimistically by the publishers, except The Naked Civil Servant, and that took 12 years.
To write?
No.
To be acknowledged?
To
right. Okay, well, I interrupted you on your two reasons why you come to America. One, that you'd been invited and you could afford to come, and the second reason?
Well, I've always been American in my heart. Ever since I saw the movies, any movie, I knew if I could get here, I would find that everybody was beautiful and everybody was rich. And in Los Angeles, they are.
But you're not in Los Angeles, you're in New York. Has your dream come true?
It has, in the sense that happiness rains down from the sky in America.
For everyone, Quentin?
Well, everybody is your friend.
In America?
In America.
For a minute, for 2 minutes, for a flash?
Yes. But what more do you need? You see, in England, you have to make friends. It's very tiring. And when you've made them, you get stuck with them, which is more tiring. But in America, you never get stuck with anybody. 3 weeks is a meaningful relationship.
Now, in other words, then, you don't want a very meaningful relationship with anyone by the sound of you. You want people to say hello to you on the street and goodbye to you in the restaurants or whatever.
That's right. I am now in the smiling and nodding racket. And this, I feel, perhaps erroneously, was what I was born to do.
Were you always in the nodding and smiling bracket?
I tried, but not many people smile or nod in England. But here, everybody smiles, everybody nods. When you are in a shop in England, you find a girl leaning on the counter, reading a copy of Elle. And when you say, do you have any ballpoint pens? Without looking up, she says, what? If they aren't there, we haven't got any. And she goes into another room. Here, they want you to buy something. When I'd only been here a little while, you know, if you're in a foreign country, your pockets become full of small change because you don't understand the money.
That's
so
right, you give them a note.
After a bit, I was clanking with precious metal. So in one shop, I took out all the money and I held it in front of her and said, will any of this do? And the girl said, oh, yes, we want 2 of those and 1 of those. And she said, I'm having a ball. Now, no one would say that in England.
But take you some trouble. They also want to know why you're buying the ball pen after a little while, if you hang around, don't they?
That's right, yes. And this I am prepared to tell them. You can say more. I'm longing to tell them. I do understand that discretion is a virtue, and it's a particularly English virtue. When I lived in England, there was a census, and a friend of mine telephoned me and said, have you heard about this? And I said, yes. And he said, I'm not going to stand at the door telling the story of my life to a stranger who's holding a clipboard. Why should I? And I said, I can tell from the tone of your voice what my answer is meant to be, but the census man has already been to our house. And when he asked me about my life, he wished he'd never begun.
So in other words, that kind of formality about friendship is your bliss, not intimacy.
I don't need intimacy. I don't think I could cope with it. I've never wanted to live with anybody. I've asked married couples how they manage to be wise, witty, kind, and beautiful for 24 hours a day for 24 years. And they laugh, but they never tell me.
But why don't you suffer from loneliness then?
Well, I've never been put to the test. I have always lived in big cities. And especially in New York, if I'd spend a week in my room doing nothing and I thought, I'm bored with this, I could reconstruct myself and go out onto 2nd Avenue, and within 2 minutes somebody would have said, hello, and I would have said, would you like to come in here and have a drink or a coffee or a meal? The world is your friend in America.
You've changed the small, dingy, dusty room that you talked about in England, in Chelsea, which I came to once,
Yes.
visited, for a smaller, dingier, dustier, if it's dustier room. You haven't expanded with your change.
I haven't expanded my way of living. I live in almost exactly the same way, but at greater expense. Of course, England is very cheap to live in. My room in England was £6 a week. That's $13 a week. Here my room is $17-something a week. Mind you, that's a bit of a statistic, because in England I also paid for my light and heat, which at least doubled my weekly expenses. Here the light and the heat are given to me, but it's still 2.5 times as expensive to live in Manhattan. You can see, my living in Manhattan is a kind of vanity. I could go and live in the same sized room in Brooklyn or the Bronx or Queens at perhaps half or 2/3 the expense. But I live here like everybody who lives in Manhattan in order to be ready to rule the world should the opportunity arise.
Do you think that, to go back to the first interview, I didn't really quite ask you a question which I dodged at the time, and I know why I dodged it. I dodged it because I did not want to sound prejudiced. I did not want to sound as if I was about to say to you, why are you homosexual, which implies, shouldn't you go to the doctor and be cured, which is what a lot of people think. That's not my reason for asking this question, but I'm going to ask you the question. Why do you think you're a homosexual?
Well, the true answer is I've no idea. But we can say certain things which may help. I am a textbook case for those who read textbooks. When I was within minutes of being born, I had pneumonia, and so I was an object of special concern to my mother. My father, perhaps for that reason, and also because I was the youngest and therefore an added expense, my father disliked me. And this may mean that I was not provided with a masculine pattern for facing the world. I lived in a woman's world, in my mother's world, among my mother's friends. And my mother introduced me to a very romantic life. I can remember that she read to me from the works of Tennyson. So I lived in a world of beautiful ladies and brave knights and chivalry and all that rubbish, so that I never learned how to live in the real world. And I think that could mean that I made the most of my weakness, my femininity. At a time when my brothers wanted to be wonderful things like engine drivers and the captains of iron ships, I only wanted to be a chronic invalid.
You mean because... It's brilliant. Because there you were never having to face anything but that wonderful... I remember being ill and longing to stay ill when I was a child. I was only minor little illnesses, but it was like in a tiny protected womb again, wasn't it?
That's right, exactly. I'm like, I believe it was Janice Page who wanted someone to watch over her. And of course, I never found anybody. I never had the faintest physical interest in women. I like women. They are my friends for various reasons. One being that women like to talk, and so do I. The things men are interested in, which are money, sport, and politics.
Some men, yes.
These I never learned to understand. And now, of course, it's too late.
But then, what you were seeking was a man's love, I assume. And so therefore, were you seeking your father's love then, just to put it in?
I don't think so. I was seeking protection. I would have said, when I was in my late teens or 20s, what I wanted was love. Because what I really wanted was admiration.
Yes.
And I didn't make the distinction at the time. And I never asked myself, then what are you going to do to win admiration? I just thought I would be sitting around looking, in my own opinion, absolutely marvelous. And people would arrive and say, "You're wonderful, you're adorable, my life is in your little hands," and all these other things. And of course they never did. I never offered anything for which I could be admired.
You never had that dark, romantic stranger?
No, I never did. And of course I had to learn in the end that no such thing exists. I once broached this subject to a woman I knew really well, and she said, "I've known a great number of men, and all of them had to be carried every step of the way."
Really? That there's a new alarm and a new indignation.
There is, yes, this is true. But of course, that's because, first of all, the moment AIDS was named, the world thought that the gay people had invented AIDS, whereas, of course, they merely distributed it faster than other people. And this was an excuse to start all over again to attack gay people. I believe in San Francisco, the attacks on gay people have increased enormously. But this is not really due to AIDS. It's due to the fact that everybody during the course of a lifetime piles up a great deal of indignation. There's your wife who no longer loves you. There are your children who do not obey you. There is your employer who never gives you any advancement. And one day you see someone that no one can blame you for attacking. And then it all pours out.
In other words, that's their excuse for a prejudice.
Yes.
And the prejudice against homosexuals must now be greater, you're saying, but really it's the same.
It's the same. The excuse is now presented.
Do you think that it's been a burden for you, being a homosexual?
Oh yes, if I could have lived among the normal heterosexual people, I would have had no problem. No, it has made my life much harder, but of course, every day that I lived at all in England, in my earlier life, was a victory. Now that I live here, if I walked along that street there with you and you said, my feet are killing me, let's go in here, I would go. I wouldn't say, well, look in and see if it looks all right. I would assume that I would be acceptable.
You've got a statement in a lot of the press that I've been reading about you, which is that you didn't just come to America to live. You came to die.
This is true. You see, I was already, I came here for the first time in 1707 for a few days. I was already 68. So I am living the very end of my life.
You're
in
80
America.
now, 81.
I'm now 80 on Christmas Day.
19.
And even Betty Davis was allowed to die at the age of 81. So presumably the end is near.
Now then, do you actually fear? I mean, as you get older, everybody feels more insecure. They must do, yes? And I can't imagine coming to a new country at your age.
Well, of course, ideally, you would come to New York when you were about 25. If you came before that, you would explode because of all the happiness raining down from the sky. And you would stay here until you were 60 to 65, and then you would go back, because in England, the very old, the very young, and the ill-equipped to live will always be looked after. Mrs. Thatcher will spread her brooding pinions over you.
We hope so.
You hope.
Now, so you're not insecure. You're not are you frightened of dying?
I will welcome it. Of course, we have to be very careful. In theory, I long for death. But as I say this, if I looked up and there was a great crack in the ceiling, I would move. Because your body wants to live in spite of everything. But in my heart, I accept death, and I welcome it. And I have made a will, and I only want time to make it all tidy.
Is it secret, your will?
No, my will is not secret. What money I have, if I have any when I die. See, I've got to die fairly soon to leave anything at all.
Yes.
Will be left to my nieces, of whom I have 3 scattered about the world.
And an epitaph?
Well, everyone says that, but I don't think about it because I will be dead. And what does it matter? You see, people who say, what do you want to have written on your tombstone, they think they will look down from a cloud and count the people at their funeral. They won't. I've got news for them. They'll be dead.
And that is it, you mean? But you are quite joyful about that for some reason.
That's fine.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Quentin Crisp, for letting me catch up with you in America.